When is a Brooklyn Nets victory not the leading storyline coming out of an NBA evening of basketball? When Kevin Durant goes down. We will break down the injury to KD in the third quarter. We're not going to talk about what it could mean, but we will talk about the way this team did rally in his absence to close out a tough Miami Heat unit coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrick breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, we have to come in flying the flags at half-mast here, as even though the Nets win 102-101, we will talk about the game, but about 38.6 seconds to go in the third quarter, Kevin Durant goes down with an apparent knee injury.
Yeah, so won't bury the lead here at all. Obviously, a huge win for the Nets. Great shot by Royce. We'll talk about all of that. Obviously, don't never want to bury a really great win by a team, but whenever you have one of the top 3 or 4 best players in all of basketball get hurt, and with an unclear injury timeline and probably something like season hinging on one player's health. I hate to go too over dramatic here. You have to talk about it. And that's where we stand with Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant he got his knee rolled on by Jimmy Butler, inadvertent, going for the ball there in the third quarter. It was actually the second time in the game that he had grabbed at a knee. This was a different knee. He ended up grabbing at both knees in this game for just 2 sort of random plays. Struggled with it for a minute or two up and down the court. Kind of everyone waited with bated breath to see if he was going to be able to work through it. Sometimes these are just things that happen, and sometimes they require visits to the locker room. The bottom line is, when we are recording this at 8:50 Eastern Sunday evening. The latest word from Jacques Vaughn is that he is going to have an MRI done on Monday to see if there's any damage. That he was quoting Vaughn here, dapping it up with players following the win. So he was still in the locker room following the game. I don't know who wants to read tea leaves on this, whoever knows, but that is where we stand with Durant. And now we are in a situation, unfortunately, this is the nature of sports. Obviously, from a personal perspective, we hope Kevin Durant's okay. And then from a team perspective, when you have a guy like Kevin Durant, in a lot of ways, your season hinges on it. And this is what we'll probably sit in waiting here for the next 24 to 48 hours to figure out what the story is for KD.
Yeah, there's not a lot of instances where the best player on your team goes down and you think, well, we'll manage our way through this. Look around the league. Take the best player on any team, have him have a potential injury that could have him out for a significant amount of time, and you know that it's going to be disruptive to what the team tries to accomplish. We'll get into that more once we get a little bit of crystallized information on what it looks like from the MRI. Funnily enough, not funnily, but this was a game where Kyrie Irving had his knee knocked, and then in the closing seconds, Tyler Hero, away from the ball, slipped on the court too and suffered some type of, maybe it's minor injury, may not be affecting long term, but there was a lot of bodies flying around. This is the kind of game that you almost anticipate some physicality. When you see Kevin Durant, or at least you and I watch this game together, when we see Kevin Durant try to figure it out and then signal to Jacques Vaughn to come out, immediately go to the locker room, we've seen time and time again. He also flat-backed in this game at one point that looked pretty brutal, and he reached for his knee, I think the other knee initially, and popped right back up. So many times all year long, we've seen Kevin Durant kind of ragdoll through hits and go down and touch a little something body part and pop back up and go through it. That somehow hits that much more significantly when you see him not gut it out, not be able to stay in the game, and immediately go back to the locker room. We always say this about athletes. They know when it's something a little more serious than a tweak or a twinge that you can sort through. We don't know how severe, but I think that was the immediate red flag of okay, we're now in the territory of this being significant potentially.
Yeah, and just to like put another piece, because like this is going to be one of these things where we're recording so close to after the game ends, and we're live on YouTube for all those listening on the podcast feed. Just so you know, appreciate everyone to jump in here live on YouTube following the game. We are still, I don't know if we're mid Vaughn press conference here as we're recording. Vaughn, I'll say, did add another thing to the imaging pieces, quote, just to make sure. He said we're going to get imaging, quote, just to make sure we're good. And Vaughn seemed to be in a good mood post game. So there was, this is from Robin Lundberg, was
maybe dodged it here.
Just maybe, maybe feeling like they kind of know, but don't know, you know what I mean? So it could be one of those situations too, where sometimes with injuries, specifically ones around the knee, there are some things you're going to get. If you follow the sport long enough, football is like this a lot, basketball too, you'll kind of get an idea of where people are. Like they can feel some things. Sometimes they can just feel something that went wrong, i.e. the trainers, like they'll know. And by the way, for anyone mentioning that he walked off, that is not always the sign. You can walk off with ACL and MCL injuries. Like it's not the walking, the locomotive walking that always gets you. It's the stopping, cutting, and stuff like that with the tears. So walking off the court is not always a sign that everything's okay. Now that's not to say that's the case here. There may be. Sometimes you can also read tea leaves on the mood from players and coaches and stuff like that prior to imaging. And if we're reading it from that, maybe we're in a situation where it's not that bad. Look, who knows? Anyone that follows the Nets know that we're about a year removed from a similar-ish situation with KD, where last season Bruce Brown inadvertently goes and bends KD's knee back, and he missed a bunch of time, and it was a really, really rough part of the season for the Nets. So these things do happen in the game. We aren't going to know a timeline until it happens. And there is a class of player in the NBA, and Kevin Durant is among that class, and the group is short. there are probably fewer than 10 guys in this group here that swing championships, right? Like that. This is the group. He is in that group. He is near the top of that group of guys who, if you're playing and you're on the team, you can swing title odds. So and that's the only reason we spend a lot of time talking about it. And if you're a fan, you kind of worry about this stuff because, unfortunately, stuff like this, a player like this, a season can hinge on it.
And obviously, when we talk, Kevin Durant, the balance is, well, you want to have him, so you want to have the potential of having to be this worried about a player, because it means you have a player so good that if he does get hurt, it could potentially derail championship aspirations that you only have because you have him. So it is that balancing act. To your point, we'll wait to see what they say. Maybe they get lucky here. I think at a minimum, you would expect him to be overly cautious around whatever's going on with the knee and bringing him back. But the other very fascinating thing that occurred here, we're going to talk about a sec coming up, is maybe you thought that this was going to be one of those suffering an injury for your superstar. Win gets taken out of the sails against a difficult, talented, very defensive-minded Miami Heat team. Cut to the Brooklyn Nets found a way to gut out a win here. It came from some key moments, especially from Royce O'Neale, as you mentioned at the top. So that's thankfully a little bit of the salve over this injury moment, is that the Nets still found a way to win. So we're going to break down how they closed out the fourth quarter in a big way coming up here in just a moment.
All right, we're going to get all into that in a second. Like I said, we're going to end this thing on a positive note, or get into this thing on a positive note. First, tell you about our friends over at TurboTax. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. Show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack a moving box of not taxes. Taste not taxes. Sing not taxes a lullaby. Hope not taxes. Sleeps through the night. This is all the not taxes theme. That's because TurboTax has you covered with the TurboTax 100% expert guarantee. An expert will do your taxes from start to finish so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes now, doesn't it? We all know that feeling that comes with just being done. TurboTax clears it for you. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full services product only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
Okay, so the other thing that happened was a full-blown basketball game in which the Brooklyn Nets were leading at the break by 2 points, 66-64. Both teams collectively came together in the third quarter and said, let's not play great basketball. That's okay. 18-13. Kevin Durant goes down with about 36 seconds in that third quarter. So the Nets are entering into this fourth quarter, trailing this game. And the first thing that came to mind, I said in the last segment there, well, the air can go out of it. The other thing that happens is you lose all sense of continuity because Kevin Durant is so critical to what you're doing. So now Kyrie Irving is on the ball more. Now there's this little bit of stagnation. You're not sure where you want to be in these outlet passes. We saw a lot of turnovers. Brooklyn Nets had, I think, 20 in the game, committed 13 of them in the second half, right? So all of these things start to look like they're going to come to light in that fourth quarter. And then they just kind of grind it out. Like they kind of lean on some key defensive moments. And I think I do want to get to the final sequence here first, if we can, which is
okay. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Which is just in the closing moments of this game, Brooklyn is down by 2 and Kyrie Irving has the ball in his hand. And I'm not going to be overly critical because, again, you got no Kevin Durant. You feel like you need to be the hero, and you probably should. But people were busting TJ Warren's chops for going for that jack up 3 with a little extra time in the second quarter before the half. Kyrie got about 3 steps over midcourt and hoisted. It was not a good look. Plenty of time. And then it ends up being in a crash of bodies. Yuta Watanabe, who we were talking about together, comes flying in, doesn't get his hands on the ball, but does effectively distract like half the Miami Heat team so that Royce O'Neale just ends up flat-footed with the ball in his hands, puts it right up and in. It gets them the lead. They get the key defensive stop, which on replay, maybe there was a foul involved, not a big deal, and they get out with the win. But again, that did feel indicative of the team mentality that they've had all year. Well, that's Yuta Watanabe and Royce O'Neale making some gritty little plays to get them this win.
Yeah, but so we'll take the Kyrie chat. We'll take the Kyrie deep 3 if it's just going to end in a good thing. I'm with you. It was one of the sort of
that though.
It was a little bit of a disconnected series. But look, the thing about this and the last series is an example of it. But I think what we've seen from this Nets team, and when I was speaking about Kevin Durant before, I was mentioning I'm mostly thinking about like ultimate upside, right? The ultimate championship upside is like you need a guy like Kevin Durant. That is not to undersell this idea that the Nets without Kevin Durant are still a damn good basketball team. Like this is still a very almost complete basketball team. Would they be able to win the championship without Durant? No. Could they win a lot of games with this unit? Definitely. Right. And I think that's what we see, even though it gets a little looks a little bit weird on the offensive end, the defense suffered almost none, right? Like the fourth quarter, they held the Heat, who were full strength here, right? Like this is pretty much a full strength Heat team. They held the Heat to 19 points, 37 total in the whole second half. This is coming off a game where they did something very similar to the Pelicans, where the Pelicans scored under 40. This team can still dial it up defensively. And when the going gets tough, they have guys who can just hoop. Like obviously Kyrie can, but we've spoken all season about the little things kind of getting done in a way that we haven't seen from the Nets before, like 50-50 balls, second chance points, making the right pass, being good role players, hitting open shots when you get them. This was kind of like indicative of what we've really praised about this team. And it kind of came out in the last moment. Yeah. Does Kyrie take a bad shot to kind of end the game? Sure. Do everyone in the world want Kyrie to take the shot? Yes. Right. Right. Like, so we all wanted Kyrie to take the shot. It probably wasn't the best shot to take. Who cares? But what happens after that is kind of sums up what the Nets have been about this season, right? It's like, yeah, Durant's not on the court. We got these 2 guys that were brought in, one in a trade, one completely off the scrap heap in Utah. And they end up kind of combining to make the play and win the game. And I think if we're going to feel positive about let's say like KD it's not terrible, but he's going to miss some time, right? Like, I think like that's a realistic, let's just say like that's the realistic outcome at this point. Right. I think you still feel great about the way this Nets team is constructed, like much different than the situation when they lost KD last year and we knew he was going to miss extended time. And I remember those podcasts very well. I was like, we were like, buckle up, Nets fans. This is going to get real damn bumpy. I actually don't feel that way about this team right now. And it's kind of like shown through these final sequences of the game where they just have an internal resolve that we haven't seen before. And it showed in that final play where it's like, yeah, Kyrie missed. Great. We're all here to clean it up and we win the game. And then stop Jimmy on the drive and the next thing. So I feel so differently about this team now than I did around a very similar situation, very close to around this time in the calendar last year. And the situation is just totally different now with the Nets.
And by the way, there is inside of that because inside of this fourth quarter sequences, there's a moment where the Nets are struggling just to kind of get some ball movement, right? They have a turnover on an inbounds play at one point. but there was one where Yuta Watanabe catches it out on the left wing and he tries to flick it to Kyrie, and it's off the mark, it's out of there. And to not be saying that I'm putting that, bad shot selection on Kyrie Irving, he was the one that said, hey, like, we're okay. Like, we've got this. And in a lot of ways, like, Kyrie Irving, still also one of the best players in the league. He needs to then immediately kind of take on that leadership role. And I think you're right. You have all these right pieces around him to be able to have success. And there's a couple of key players for Brooklyn that we'll talk about in the third segment here, but it's worth highlighting because I scrolled through some of these sequences, specifically on the offensive end for the Brooklyn Nets. You have the Nicholas Claxton alley-oop from Kyrie Irving, which I kept trying to re-describe to myself as it looked like he was going for a finger roll, but it could have been any more of an intentional pass. Kyrie Irving gets a 2-point shot off. Seth Curry makes an 11-foot pull-up jumper. Royce O'Neale misses the long one, but that transitions into a pretty good defensive sequence ultimately. The point that it's making here is that little 4-foot 2-pointer. There's not a lot of buckets getting made in the closing sequences of this game for the Brooklyn Nets, but guess what? Kyrie Irving only made one of them. He was involved in two. He's obviously a big part of how the defense has to react to him, but it solidifies, I think, your point of there are guys that not only are capable, but are comfortable stepping up in those moments. And that isn't something that we've always been able to look at in years past. We know last season, you want a little James Johnson action in there for you. Like, it's not going to be something you can rely on. And everything that Royce O'Neale has done to this point, you mentioned Yuta, Curry, who we were talking about watching this in real time. He maybe finally looks like he's fully healthy and back up to speed with those ankle issues that he dealt with in the offseason. You're right. Silver lining, you should feel a lot better about having one of your stars miss some time, hopefully relatively short, when you have this type of cast. It's going to look different, but you should feel like you still have the offensive firepower. And then to your point, the defensive side, which we'll talk about, I think, more in this segment coming up, like, you have more than enough guys to say, hey, if we need to get gritty here in the absence of Kevin Durant, we should be able to lean into our defensive value on a night-to-night basis. They held him to 37 points in the second half, the Miami Heat, 2 quarters under 20.
Yeah, look, you're never going to replace Kevin Durant 1-for-1. Like, you just can't.
You don't want to not in the starting lineup? Move on.
It's just not possible. Like, he's just too good. There's very, very, it's impossible. I'm not even going to entertain it. You can't replace him. But one thing about this Nets team, and you mentioned some of the names that make this situation slightly different for where they stand as an overall team last year. We knew last year without KD, it was like Kyrie, and then it was really just such a massive drop off in talent. Like you mentioned, James Johnson, sort of probably tongue in cheek, but it's a good example of sort of some of the guys that they were relying on. Like, they needed tons of Cam Thomas. Like, they needed all this different stuff to happen when KD was out, and it was bad, right? Like, it was a really, really bad stretch. The Nets don't have a KD analog that's just going to come in and be able to play max minutes and be Kevin Durant, because, again, no one can. Now, what they do have, though, is they have lots of little pieces that can start putting back together some of the product. Never all of it, but some of it. Yep. And coincidentally, they do it in some of the same ways that Kevin Durant already does. So if you look at like who they have to be, like, other firepower they have, for whatever you want to say about Seth and his struggles in the playoffs last year, you're right. He looks a lot better right now. He's an elite mid-range shooter, which he just is totally uncredited for, can kind of started to be able to score at 3 levels and can provide you points in a regular season pinch when you need it. He's actually really geared to do that. We know TJ Warren plays at 3 levels also. Like, he's able to do that also. They have some other scoring options here that they can turn to, sort of break glass in case of emergency guys, but also guys that have been getting a decent amount of run that can start filling in some of those minutes. Because when you're trying to fill in 36 minutes of peak Kevin Durant, it's going to be tough. When you're filling it in with guys that can still kind of score, TJ can defend pretty well too. They already know Kyrie's there. You already know defensively you're getting so much out of Claxton right now. We're going to talk about Simmons. We'll talk about Simmons in the third segment here, because that deserves a little bit of a longer shrift. But in general, they just have the pieces to be able to tread water in a way, and not even tread water. Look, they just won the game. They just beat Kevin Durant. They just beat a good Heat team, a good full strength Heat team with this cast, because they're built so much better right now than they were last season.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is where Nets fans can feel not great about this situation, but at least a little bit better, because I know for a fact the mood on a Kevin Durant knee knock almost like a year ago, I'll look up the day, whatever he got hurt, like a year ago, was just totally different then than it is now. And it's because they just have some of the pieces that they just didn't have last season.
And by the way, because they've rattled off all the wins that they have over the recent month and a half,
Yes.
right? Like that matters too. But we said log the wins. Why? Because you don't know what could happen. Rest, injury, and otherwise. That's a big factor here. Coming up, as Doug said in a second, Ben Simmons and the performance of Nicholas Claxton and why you feel like you have some defensive anchors that can help sustain in KD's absence.
All right, going to make myself feel a little bit better here because we're going to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all that fat and calories, now you're speaking my language. You got to try Built Bar. We're done with the holidays. You're setting new goals for yourself for the new year. You're setting those eat healthier goals. I know I am. It's constantly on my mind. What can I use? What can I snack on where I'm going to feel good about the stats? That is where Built Bar comes in. They taste like a candy bar, but they had some of these amazing macros. Like I said, the stats, let me give them to you here. 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, 17 grams of protein. They're 100% covered in chocolate, real chocolate. They got the flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. I know the stats don't make sense with these flavors, but they figured it out. You go to built.com. You can go grab them at Walmart, Sam's Club. They have them there too. Like I said, head to that nearest Walmart, walk in the pharmacy section, grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You pick up a 4-pack of cookies and cream, double chocolate, coconut puffs. The flavors just go on. Built Bars just figured this stuff out. Go to built.com today to grab yourself a box. Built.com.
All right. So let's obviously close this out, highlighting again some of the key reasons the Nets won this game, point blank period, and why you can feel a little bit good about it going forward until KD is fully back. We'll get more of that information and we'll talk about it more throughout this week as the news comes out. Quick tip of the cap to Royce O'Neale. We'll talk more about this, I think, in the days to come too. He had 6 assists in this game. That really matters. I've been tracking kind of those games for him and why you're looking for some of that balance. But you specifically mentioned Ben Simmons and Nicholas Claxton. And before the Kevin Durant injury, I was saying how this is one of those nights where you go, boy, the box score is not going to tell you enough on Nicholas Claxton. 31 minutes, 6 of 8 from the field, the 11 rebounds, the 3 blocks, 13 points. None of that does enough justice to how impactful he was. And in a lot of ways, it's in tandem with what he's doing with Ben Simmons on the defensive end.
Yeah, so Claxton, he only ends up getting credited for 3 blocks, but I
think it was like 7.
I thought he had 4, and I said before, like the degree of difficulty on some of the blocks was insane. It should have counted, like you said, for 8. The defensive impact was measurable again. Over the weekend, they finally updated. I don't think we podcasted since they did this, but most major books updated the Defensive Player of the Year odds. He's currently 3rd across the industry, behind only Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brook Lopez in all traditional markets. So the national recognition has arrived for Nick Claxton in a way that we've been preaching.
You're welcome, NBA. We did the work for you. I said, you're welcome, NBA. We did the work for you. We've been telling you for a couple of months now that Nicholas Claxton is that type of player on the defensive
great
end.
News. Just go back and listen from 3 months ago when we said this, and then you would have just been ahead of the curve. I actually did get a bunch of, we'll get into Simmons here in a second. I did get a bunch of receipts from people that had bet some Nick Claxton long futures for Defensive Player of the Year, like plus 5,000s and stuff. A couple credited because we had talked a lot about in the podcast. So good on you. Hope you get there on those. Okay. One thing, you and I watched the game together, and you pointed this out while we were watching, and I think this is going to be the thing we're going to need to watch out for, especially if KD misses time. And that is that Ben Simmons was not part of the closing group in this game. He checked back in at 30 seconds and it was defensive only. So he really wasn't part of it. He checked out 5 minutes left to go in the 4th, was not part of the group that was closing. You pointed out correctly when we were watching that this might be a problem. Like when Kevin Durant is not on the court, to be able to solve so much of the scoring and spacing issues because he can score everywhere and everybody, that the Simmons and Claxton pairing gets significantly more difficult to keep together when you don't have the best mid-range scorer like in the history of the game on your team. And I wonder how much, if he were to miss time, this will be affecting, because clearly they made the choice tonight. They said, we're not going to get enough. Like we can't pair these 2 guys together for a lot of minutes. If KD's not going to be on the court, they might start fouling them. Like they can't make up for the spacing. I mean, are you worried about this at all? Because again, like they had to choose between the 2 guys and they chose Claxton. Like and maybe that's an Adebayo thing. Like it's a rim protection thing. There's all these pieces. I trust Vaughn to have made the right decision. I'm not questioning it. I'm just saying that it's interesting that we might be in a situation now where the Nets might have to pick and choose a little bit more because they don't have a generational guy that can make up for the deficiency that these two guys have, which is floor spacing and shot creation.
Yeah, and this is the thing. So, 7 assists, 7 rebounds for Ben Simmons tonight, a block in there as well. Those categories are great. It's the 4 points on 2 of 4 shooting, right? And that's the difference in why Jacques Vaughn goes with Nicholas Claxton, because the offensive reliability and consistency is far greater on his ledger right now than it is for Ben Simmons. You can't rely on him on the offensive floor to be anything more than a facilitator, which is great when you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie and all the spacing is there for you. Again, I'll go back to the top where you said the depth does give me a little bit of comfort on this team. Ironically, we'll talk about during this week too. There's going to be plenty to discuss. Sean Marks, he brought, guaranteed the contracts for Yuta Watanabe. He guaranteed it as well for Markieff Morris in that group and Evan Sumner. Yes. And the Markieff Morris one actually might end up being kind of significant because I think what you start to do here, you mentioned TJ Warren, just enough size, just big enough to occupy a role and offensively. Markieff Morris is just a big enough guy and a veteran. So I think what you're going to end up seeing here is just breaking those two pieces apart, saying Nicholas Claxton is going to be the primary guy that we believe can do it consistently offensively, and then finding ways to manufacture some scoring to put alongside Kyrie, to put into that second unit. But they're going to have, it's going to look different now. For however long that Kevin Durant's going to be out, it's going to look different. And tonight, you could say maybe that tonight it was specific to this game, but it's hard to not look at it and go, I'd be hard-pressed to say we're going to go with a closing lineup of Claxton, Ben Simmons, Kyrie, Royce O'Neale, and name any other player you want to put there. Seth Curry, Joe Harris, whatever it may be. I think you got to work in Yuta Watanabe. You need size to replace for Kevin Durant, and then you need enough offensive consistency. So I think you'll see these guys get broken up in the short term, and that's not a terrible thing because you can, I think, sustain yourself for a little while just finding other ways because you have enough offensive weapons to pair with a lot of defensive upside guys.
Yeah, like the glass half full piece of this for Simmons would be like he takes this opportunity to get more aggressive. I think the thing we need to see with Simmons specifically is the aggression. It just continues to not be there on the offensive end. It happens once or twice a game, and you kind of like you say to yourself, "Ooh, that looked nice." Like, "Ooh, we're taking Jimmy Butler a little into like the into the mid post and going to get a little hook over him." And then it's like, well, okay, that happened once, and then that never happens again, right? And this has been the consistent theme for Simmons over a large part of the season is that there's just no aggression at all on the offensive end. Like even there's been flashes of it. We've seen it from time to time, but in terms of like a consistent full game, full quarter, I mean, full 5 minutes, we've never seen it like at really sustained. Now that's okay when Kevin Durant's on the court. It's fine. Who do we want taking the shots? Kevin Durant, obviously, like almost every time. But there's a part of the game that Simmons needs to unlock for this team to hit the next level. And that is the part where he can make defenses like get really worried about getting to the rim. He just hasn't wanted to do it. Maybe there's a situation where if KD were to miss time, he's just forced to do it, right? And forced to do it in a way that no one is going to dig him for being like, hey, why are you taking 11 shots a game when Kevin Durant's on the court? I think that is actually a meaningful thing right now. It's like, do you want Simmons in this current offense to be a really high usage guy? Right. Definitely not. Right? Like we want just about everybody else taking shots. But at some point, you want it to have it to be at least a threat. And so I think there's a world where even though the Claxton Simmons pairing is going to look probably decidedly worse without KD kind of picking up some of the offensive pieces for it, there's a world where it could unlock with very little pressure a chance for him to just start taking it on some of these guys a little bit more consistently. And if it looks bad, it looks bad. Like there's just no way for things to look good. Like you can't look good at something until you just are willing to look bad. Right? Like that's just the only, it's like anything in life. It's the only way to get over some of these humps. Like you have to be willing to have it look bad for it to start looking good. I just don't think Simmons has gotten to that point. And it's totally fine because you have these other guys that you'd much rather take the shots. But if there's a situation where there's going to be an extended absence, I wonder if we see that unlocked for him a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting too. I think my other thing to watch for is going to be in terms of setting up the offense and being a facilitator. Again, when Ben Simmons is on the court with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, well, he brings the ball up the court and Kyrie plays off a little bit and finds his spots and then gets the ball into his hands. Now, Well, automatically you may see closing lineups where it's going to be Kyrie on ball. The thing that we've talked about leading up to this and up to the deadline potentially is another defensive-minded ball-handling guard to have on this roster. And taking Kevin Durant off the court does more than just take away his shooting in the mid-range jumper and his defensive value, which you and I talked about in this game. I had said when Kevin Durant was up at the top of the key, when it was Adebayo, all of a sudden that defensive switchability with Claxton and Simmons behind him is beautiful. Well, you're not going to get that as much. And now you do have to think about who are your other primary ball handlers on this roster that can take off some of that workload, because I think you're right. Maybe it triggers something for Ben, but I don't think you can put that next thing onto his plate plus the other stuff that we've liked that he's been doing, right? Because then you start saying, how many plates can you balance, Ben Simmons, when you've already been trying to do incremental progress here? So it'll be fascinating to watch. I don't feel terrible. That's also clouded in the shroud of we don't know officially what's going on with Kevin Durant. So TBD, if it turns out he's going to miss significant time, I think there's a path forward for them, but it's going to be a difficult one. And we're just going to kind of have to strap into the idea of it looking drastically different than some of the fun times we've been having over the last 15, 20 games. And that doesn't mean this team still can't be successful.
Look, this is gonna be a really interesting week for the Nets. This might be a week that defines a lot of the season. This could be, we could come out of this totally fine. Could come out of this with some issues. Could be somewhere in between. I suspect it's probably that latter piece. We're going to be covering it all this entire week. We'll talk about the contract, guaranteed contracts for the guys that we talked before. We'll talk about whatever news we hear about Durant as soon as that comes out. So imaging on Monday, hopefully there's really good news there, and we'll probably hopefully get an injury timeline on that. So we're going to be covering all this stuff all week long. Make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Really appreciate tons of people here on YouTube. Again, just tons of appreciation from us for everyone that's jumped into YouTube. If you're in YouTube right now or not, make sure you go over and just hit that subscribe button on Locked On Nets. Set the alerts too. You'll know when we're going live. You'll know when the new videos are posted. We're posting these every single day of the week about the Brooklyn Nets. It's easy and free for you to do. And for those on the podcast and for those hanging out on YouTube right now, we will hang out a little bit here and do some extra post-game stuff for YouTube listeners only. So that's just another reason to make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Nets YouTube.
If you focus on what you left behind, you will never be able to see what lies ahead. Gusto from Ratatouille.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
The podcast, where I'll go right into the silver lining. Everyone in the comments at Locked On Nets, share your thoughts, your concerns, your fears as we wait to get more information on Kevin Durant. But I was going to add in at the end of the episode, and we'll bring this back up during the week too. When you take a look over at the standings right now, the Miami Heat, who the Brooklyn Nets just beat, are sitting in the 8th spot right now. 6.5 game lead for Brooklyn over that 8th seed. So this is the point of winning those games, of beating up on some bad teams. You give yourself wiggle room. Hey, if we need to chalk up a couple of scheduled losses because without him, we know the big matchup Thursday against the Boston Celtics. Yep, it's going to look different now if you don't have Kevin Durant. That's okay. We saw Kyrie Irving take a knee knock in this game. Guess what? If he looks a little bit shaky, sit him down for a couple of games right here. Like, pick your spots, be smart about it, and use what you've built up here, which is being one game out of the Eastern Conference lead and knowing that you've put yourself in a pretty good spot to be able to sustain this.
Yeah, look, you win 18 out of 20 games, you buy yourself a bunch of stuff, right? Like, that's just the nature of the way the game goes. And they have had extraordinary health so far this year for the most part. Like, Kevin Durant's missed one game. He's among the league leaders in minutes. Like, we kind of always knew that something would kind of come up. Things come up, right? It's just the only thing is you worry about the severity of whatever comes up. Like, that's really what it all boils down to. And so we just hope that that's not the case. But you're right. Like, the part where they have banked a lot of wins, it does really, really help, because the other thing that we didn't mention earlier in the podcast was at this point of the season last year when he got hurt. I just forgot to look if this was the same timeline. Do it now since we're on live. Is that they had not banked wins at this point. Like, right. This point last year when he got hurt, or whenever it was that he ended up missing time, they had not banked a lot of wins. It was looking real rough leading into that. And we had said, so he got right. It was almost to the day. It's a week to the day. So it's January 15th is when he got hurt last season and then missed basically 2 months. And that was, we had said at the time, was like, hey, everyone buckle up for the play-in because that's where this is headed,
Right.
right? Like this is headed for play-in territory, and we were totally right because they just did not have the horses behind him to be able to rally any kind of meaningful, just second team in his wake. And so that's just nothing about it is the same right now, right? Like if he were to miss time, would they lose games? For sure, but they're 14 games over 500. They're one game out of the first place in the East. They got to play the Celtics this week. They're much deeper already just because by nature of who they have in the team. It's just a totally different situation than last year. And it's crazy. And it's crazy that it's almost to the day. I mean, it's like it's 1 week apart from year over year.
Yeah, and sat there through an 11-game losing streak in his absence there, right? So, I mean, that's what it was. And I was going to check where the record stood before he went out with that injury last year. If you happen upon that, Doug, in the background, just to say, like, hey, where were you? 27-13, right now as you sit here in the season, how much actual wiggle room did you have when that process began? Somebody asked, okay, there you go, I found it. Khan asking if Katie's out for, say, a month, do you think the front office will feel pushed to make a move before the deadline? Well, there's no one-to-one replacing. I think it would be once they found out how severe it is and how much time he's going to miss. If it was going to be something substantial, would they try to make a move in the margins to bolster what they have to make sure that they can survive that and get through? And maybe most importantly, not drain Kyrie Irving over that next month if it was going to be that long, right? Not overtax players so that by the time you get to the playoffs, people are a little more depleted, etc. Yeah, maybe, but it's still going to come back to the same problem. The Nets don't have a lot of assets. They don't have a lot of things to move, and it becomes even more difficult to think about making a move if you're saying take a valuable piece on this roster and move them off while you also don't have Kevin Durant. So I don't know. I think it'll kind of depend on the timeline and then how the team looks without him, because the one thing we can say too is I'll pull up their schedule here going forward. We know they have Boston coming up, but they're also still going to have some very winnable games, even without Kevin Durant on the schedule. So after Boston, they have OKC, they have San Antonio, Phoenix, Utah, Golden State. Like there's a rough stretch there, but they get Detroit. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Keep going. I'll make another point. Keep going, and then I'll say.
No, it's just, they have Detroit mixed in there. They have the Lakers who have been struggling. This is going, and then Washington. But there are a lot of, there's Boston twice here between now and February 1st. There is the Clippers who are playing much better basketball. This was already going to be maybe a rough stretch here. But if you take a look at the next 10 games or 15 games and say, hey, tread around 500, that's totally fine. However many games KD is going to miss. So I think you probably have more wiggle room than you need to worry about making a reaction move if you're Sean Marks.
Yeah. No, this is not a scary part of the schedule right here. I mean, Boston obviously is a tough one. OKC, they've been playing really well. They're beating Dallas, and we're talking about this now. They obviously ran it up on Boston the other day. That's been a really scrappy team. San Antonio stinks. Phoenix is dealing with a bunch of injuries right now. Neither Chris Paul or Devin Booker played. They're playing right now while we're talking. Utah obviously been scrappy. Golden State still without Curry. Philadelphia, this Embiid thing could be. I don't know if this Embiid thing is a real problem. I mean, he's missed time. It's another foot issue. I don't know what's going on with him, but it doesn't really sound great. Detroit's awful, and then it's the Knicks, and then it's the Lakers, who are still not going to have AD back at that point. Point being, that's most of the games leading into the trade deadline. And I really if I'm just guessing right now, based on Vaughn's kind of mood and Katie still being in the locker room and stuff like that, I don't want to jinx it because that is not a real thing.
This isn't on the official podcast though, so you can say it.
Yeah, the jinxes aren't real or whatever. But my guess is that he's gonna be okay. I've just read enough injury stuff over the years, followed this stuff so closely, with every team and injury reporting. Sometimes you kind of just know, everyone's got the mood on them, and there's a big difference in tone. So I don't know. That's my guess right now. It's not going to be too terrible.
No, I agree. I agree with you, because usually you'll hear nothing in a post game. Not even a whisper of anything or hear anything.
I found a good question. I'm gonna bring this one up here.
Yeah, go ahead.
This one it says, I think Kyrie took that logo 3 because the Heat were doubling him every time, which was leading to Nets turnovers. The role players need to step up. I'll focus on the double team. I actually think this is probably somewhat correct. In that he was just getting it quick before they could just throw a blitz at him to just get it out of his hands. I also think there's a part where it's hey, we're down. It's not the worst thing to just get an early shot, i.e. because of what just happened here. So while the shot was not amazing, with a guy like Kyrie, I think his thing is like, hey, I have an inch of daylight, and like that's what I need. And if it's a little closer than the logo, then what's optimal is not the worst thing in the world. It was just one of those things, like in the moment. I think you and I try to be really true to our reactions to things in the moment, and like making sure it carries over. Results be damned. And this was a moment where we were watching together, and we we're like, man, that was a really quick trigger and kind of not a great look. So I think we're just trying to be conscious of like what we thought in the moment and bringing it over.
Yeah, and he took that shot at 5.1 in the game.
Yep.
And they're down. To your point, they're down 1, and you have a couple of those previous sequences where, again, you're looking at it and saying, we're having a hard time moving it. We're having a hard time getting the ball in and out of my hands if they're going to bring the double team. So yeah, I don't. We said this before about Kyrie, and by the way, about all the best players. The best players get the latitude to take those kind of shots because you go, oh God, you should never. That went in. Of course you should. You always should, right? So you are afforded that, and I don't hate the idea of like, hey, you get in there, you take the quick shot, and if you want to be results oriented, it did afford where like, hey, Miami clearly wasn't defensively necessarily set up, the way they wanted to be, boxing guys out. Yuta Watanabe came flying in kind of, free and open, and then just banged in some bodies. Royce O'Neale is completely unguarded standing there in the paint. So all those things come together. I'm not going to harp on it. By the way, Royce O'Neale put it back and they won the game, so who cares?
Wait, can I bring another? I'm going to bring another one up here because I think this one's funny. Kyle, I'm pretty sure Kyle's been in here a lot. So appreciate if not Kyle, then appreciate you having here now, but I'm pretty sure I recognize his name from a lot of YouTube stuff. The great opportunity for the Nets to learn how to play. I don't want the Nets to learn how to play with KD.
Name a scenario in the playoffs where you want the Nets to be able to say, we learned to play with
busting on Kyle. I'm busting on Kyle because I totally get it. We just said the same thing about Simmons, but I also wanted to bring it up to say there's like no world. I don't want to know what they look like with Kevin Durant. Let another team figure out. Let's watch another team and see what they look like without Kevin Durant. Now, I do think that in general, I stand by what we said before with Simmons. Like, I think this is specifically a chance if he were to miss time, no matter what happens with KD, they need to see something more from Simmons. It's an absolute necessity.
Because you said it in there about if he's going to miss time. And by the way, it's like, this is also just the mission statement for Ben Simmons for the entire season is you need to start to get better. You need to continue to be attacking offensively, because then assuming Kevin Durant is back with Kyrie Irving, that makes it that much more potent offensively. That opens up all kinds of different things for this team and starts to make perimeter shooting look like, firing into the ocean, as opposed to for stretches, especially when it's Claxton and Simmons saying, well, it's one or the other here. We could have some congestion. We could create some easy opportunities for defenses to go against us. So yeah, it's all good. What do we got here? I don't know what Buzz is saying. Let's take a look. I don't pre-screen these, Doug. Do you think we are getting away from ball movement and going back to Nash's post KD up on every play on offense? No. My short answer is no. I just think inside of this game, you got caught into a spot where, again, take Kevin Durant.
The ball movement was pretty good in this game.
That's what I was going to say. Like, again, like even, by the way, even after Kevin Durant went out in the fourth quarter, the ball movement was still good. Some of the passes were just sloppy. And by the way, the passes were sloppy all the way through the third quarter too, when Kevin Durant was playing. I think they had a somewhat sloppy game, especially from a turnover standpoint. But no, I actually, if anything, I'll tell you right now, if this was the Steve Nash-led Brooklyn Nets and Kevin Durant was going down with an injury for an amount of time, that would have felt a lot worse, because we saw that Nash wasn't necessarily going to be able to pivot and have a system in place where you could still win some games.
Al Max said this one: does the shooting coach work with Simmons or Claxton? Okay, so a couple things here. Most basketball, for those that don't know, most NBA teams with assistants work with a group of guys, right? Like, it's like, how do I explain this? Like, the assistant coaches are usually broken up among different players, right? And like, that's who the players kind of work with and who they work with. I don't know what the exact breakdown is on the Nets right now, and sometimes it can kind of change. I do know that Claxton has worked with, and I credit Eric Slater for this because he was the first one I saw post it, that Claxton has been working with one of these guys. And I was gonna say Harrington, but he was let go, so I can't remember who it is. That has actually is why you see his foul shot look a little different now, right? He's pausing more at the top of his release, and that's why there's a lane violation on every time he shoots. And he airballed a couple of these already, but he's trying to change. I don't know if that's the case with Simmons, but I do know it's the case with Claxton, like that he is working. One of these coaches is working with him on the shot. There doesn't seem to be a ton of meaningful movement on the Simmons thing. There never has been throughout his career. Everything looks exactly the same now as it did years ago when people started asking if he was ever going to shoot. If anything, it looks worse, or it looks less because he just shoots less. So I don't know what that looks like. If they are working with him, it doesn't. The only reason I was going to say this because I don't think a lot of times with the NBA, they'll have shooting. There are guys that are definitely just primarily just shooting coaches. The Grizzlies had a really great guy for years. Some of these names I'm kind of blanking on, but in general, the way that NBA teams are structured is that like different assistant coaches work. There's usually like a head coach, an offensive assistant coach, a defensive assistant coach, and then like player development coaches who are broken up among different players that like kind of work with them and get their work in with those guys. So this is a long rambling answer. Doesn't say much, except that I know that Claxton is working with someone who has changed his shot style, right? To like try to hit free throws better. We'll see if it yields results.
I did my best in the background to try to find which coach it was. The results were not so great. The bottom.
I'll try to find it. I know. I can think. I know exactly. It was Eric posted it, and I'll try to find it.
Yeah, but I think you're right. And the other thing too is it's like the Nicholas Claxton free throw work, and we heard about it in the offseason too. And then it changed from the very beginning of the year at a certain point. Then he started doing the longer extended pause, and he's trying to find a consistent rhythm with that. Again, I think that you want Ben Simmons to work on the things that you would need or want to see him improve. Also, you also want him to continue to be very dominant at the other stuff. Like in this game, we saw that one play where he kind of left Joe Harris to just take an absolute bulldozer in the lane because he was trying to see if he could get around. He takes those risks for steals on the defensive end. I want him to keep working on the agility. I want him to keep working on jumping those lanes. I want to make sure, like, I don't think that we've seen 100% of what he's going to be defensively for the Brooklyn Nets. So if I'm going to put in the hierarchy, it probably does start with be an absolute lockdown bulldog defensively, also be a really good facilitator. And yes, I'd like to be able to count on you for 7 to 10 shots a game, not 2 to 4 like he had tonight, right? So like there's some balance to be struck there, but I don't know if like screaming at it to have it get done. You said it, like it's been a flaw in his game his entire career. It's going to be really hard for me to think that he's going to turn it on or fix those issues, or that the coaching staff is going to over belabor those points when there's plenty of other things to work on, which has led to a lot of success for the team overall too, right? Like they went on this winning streak without Ben Simmons having to be an offensive weapon. That kind of is okay as long as Kevin Durant is okay.
I gotta be honest with you, I didn't hear anything you just said. Eric tweets a lot. So I'm trying to, like
it's just been not easy to find information on Eric's
I need like 30 more seconds. But
right, to know through and I will find some other people talking some
so stuff. Whatever you said, I just agree with wholeheartedly.
Yeah,
no disagreements coming from me.
But other than that, though, I mean, I guess like you said, the schedule's all right. We weren't going to stick around too long on the podcast, but
brutal. I actually finally found it. December 20th. Eric has tweeted a lot since December 20th. Just so
the volume shooter.
Everyone knows. And I got all the way there to just have him not name the coach that he's working with. He says getting some coaching on free throws. You'll still see the extended pause at the top of the stroke that wasn't there early in the season. So credit Eric Slater from Clutch Points. I believe Empire Network finally found the tweet. And then he doesn't say who the coach is, and I actually can't tell who it is from this video. So there you go. A lot of that for absolutely nothing.
Yeah, we should be good. Anybody else have any other questions? Quick shout out, and then we're gonna close this thing out. Otherwise, and again, it is funny to bury the lead of like beating a really good Miami Heat team. Like that actually matters that you did that without him, and you trailed in the fourth quarter as well. The other thing I think we talk about the roster so much. I mentioned in the show. Like, do you think it's pretty easy just to be like, hey, TJ Warren, if you're capable, pick up a little bit of that scoring load? Like there is that 1-to-1, not production, not consistency, all that.
Pause real quick. I figure out who it is. I want to get through this. It's Ryan Forehand Kelly that's working with him. There you go. He's assistant coach. It's Ryan that was working with Claxton. We solved it, everybody.
It took so long, I completely couldn't care any less than now at this point.
That's how you podcast for everyone out there. No, I wanted to just make sure the credit was where credit was due, because I knew that was a thing, and I know this is how this works, and I just screwed up about being able to point out the exact guy in the right moment. Anyway, we'll move on now. But it's Ryan Forehand Kelly who was working with Nick Claxton on the shooting. Go.
Yeah, no, and I guess so it's like then the next question would be like, is there a coach that's working on Ben Simmons around finishing around, around the rim, etc. Like, we saw tonight. He had the one little turnaround, looked smooth as butter. He had two other ones that you couldn't tell if his eyes were closed when he took them. So I don't know if it's a consistent rhythm. I think too, you said this about the Jimmy Butler when he backed him down into the paint, and that was the one that he was successful on. The one thing I will say, if you've seen anything, I think what I've seen from Ben Simmons is when you put him down in the post and he posts somebody up and he's lined up with the basket, not from the side, not on the baseline. If he's head on at the basket, I think his success percentage is a lot higher than when he has to do a little bit of that up and under, when he has to sidestep around and kind of throw an off-angled shot. Those would look pretty brutal. So can the Nets try to manufacture those kind of opportunities offensively? Maybe that's the first baby step in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. Look, we're all rooting for Simmons here. There's no bigger Simmons fan or group of people that want Simmons to be great than us. Cause like him being great is the path to the Nets being really, really great. Like they're already a really good team right now. A guy like him turning it on to like any sort of offensive like version.
What do you think you're getting out of him right now? Like the totality of what his potential is. Are we getting 60% of what he could be? 7? You know what I mean? Because I do think you're right of like, if you can scratch and be 85% of the guy we think you are.
I think defensively we're getting a lot of it.
Yeah.
I think defensively
pretty close to,
yeah, like pretty close to what you need him to be. Like he's taking on the most difficult assignments. He looks completely up for the task. Like he was awesome on CJ the other night at times where he was like just kind of ball tracked them through multiple pin downs around the court the whole time. Like I think that version of on the defensive end, I think is pretty much fine. The offensive piece is just bad. I don't really know another way around it. Like it's incomplete, right? It's incomplete to the point where it's detrimental in certain areas. So I think that's what it is.
Let's close out on the let's take a look.
Oh yeah, thanks Jamal. They did a check in on that
27-15 last year. Oh, and by the way, so the Nets are 27-13, they were 27-15. I feel leaps and bounds more confident that this currently constructed team can sustain and not go on an 11-game losing streak the way that team did last year.
This team would have trouble finding, knock on wood, this team would have trouble finding 11 losses in a row. Yeah. Like they're just too talented. Like they have too much right now that they just didn't have last season.
Who's also a frequent flyer inside the show. Okay, we are going to close it out, but here's what I was going to ask you was, and we'll talk about this, I think, once we get more information. Like, is the Claxton, he only played 31 minutes in this game, but is the Claxton...
some of that was foul trouble, but go, yeah.
No, that's what sorry, because of the foul trouble, but is Claxton, so he's 6 of 8 from the field. Obviously, the percentage has been phenomenal. The 11 rebounds, 13 points. Like, if in KD's absence, Claxton gives you 15 to 18 points a game, combined with everything else, like, is that enough where you go, yeah, it's okay if Ben still isn't quite figuring out, you know what I mean? Like, there's probably a world here where if Claxton can give you like 15 a night consistently on the offensive end with what he does defensively, it marginalizes what Ben Simmons has to do offensively, but beyond rebounding and facilitating. So I wonder about that. Like how much better does Claxton have to be where we worry less about what Ben Simmons is doing?
15. I think that what it would take for him to get to 15 is probably more than you're willing to give up in like other areas. Cause he just needs so many things to go right for him to get that many points. Like a lot of his stuff is born out of just dunker spot open, the ball got moved around enough and he finally got it. It's fine. It's not a dig on him, but he's just not a creator. We've seen it a little bit more. Like he is clearly getting stronger around the rim. He's getting more confident around the rim finishing. I guess there's like some world that he could do it.
Double digits.
Probably giving up. You're probably just giving up so much. Like you're not going to you're never running a Claxton post up. Like he's not really a pick and roll guy. Right. Like it's just not how he is. Like, that's just not how he's born. So, or like not how he plays. And so I don't know. I think the points will just come. It's like more like Seth Curry steps up and, it takes a few more shots. TJ Warren's going from 22 minutes to 25 minutes and getting, something like that. I think it's kind of coming more from there.
Don't be shocked if Patty Mills gets some run here for the extra ball handler. Vets love to vet. All right, we're going to close this one out. We'll update the injury around Kevin Durant. We have some good off-day content ahead of the Boston matchup on Thursday night, so don't miss out on a single bit of that. As Doug tells you during the podcast, it's YouTube channel where we're doing the live post-game stuff, bonus content. It's also the podcast feed. You get us, you like us, you love us, you want more of it. And we'll be back next time talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.